All right, everyone. Ready to get started? All right. Welcome to Startup Grind, Austin. I am David Clink-Scales. I'm the new director. Kimberly, who's been helping me check people in, was the previous director. I definitely want to thank her for all her hard work over the last couple of years running this event. So, a little bit about me. I'm a software developer / community organizer type of guy. Started Austin on Rails, a technology user group, in 2005, and ran that for 10 years. And I run Open Coffee Club, which is a twice monthly meetup at Houndstooth Coffee downtown, which is just an entrepreneur meetup. We basically just get together, chat, and have coffee twice a month, and then we also are meeting up north as well. We're meeting at the Domain. So we've been doing that for almost 6 years. So it's just a landing spot for people coming to Austin. They want to get out and meet the community, or if they're new to Austin, they're trying to get the vibe. We're always there for people to just come and chat and talk about what they're up to. So this event, Startup Grind, it started in 2010. Has anyone been to a Startup Grind event before? Okay, like 3 people, 4 people. So the reason we have these is to educate, inspire, and connect entrepreneurs in ecosystems all over the world. So they just, actually this month, hit 250 chapters globally. And it comes out of Silicon Valley. Mountain View is where this came from. But Austin's been around for at least 3 or 4 years. First by Andy and then run by Kim. So it's had a good run here, and I'm hoping to just put my spin on it, and we'll see where we go. Ash is great. I'm really happy to have him here tonight. He's a great teacher, lean concepts, so it's going to be a good conversation. Let's see, what else? So sponsorship. Sponsors for tonight, we have Miller Egan. They're a law firm. They serve startups mostly. And they have been gracious enough to sponsor us. And then they also have a blog that one of their attorneys writes called Silicon Hills Lawyer. SiliconHillsLawyer.com is a fantastic resource for issues that startups face when, possibly having to deal with legal issues. It helps educate the startups about legal challenges without having to see an attorney. You can just read these awesome articles and get good info. So definitely check out that blog, and Miller Egan as a firm if you need an attorney. And of course, Capital Factory, who's hosting us tonight in this awesome new space. I'm assuming this is probably most of you's first time to be in here, but it is truly awesome. So appreciate them having us here. Woohoo! So, all right. Well, that's pretty much it on the announcements and welcome and all that. Does anybody else have anything they want to say? Throw out? Everybody excited to be here? All right. There's Ash. There he is. Okay. So I guess I will have Ash come up here. Ash Maurya, everyone. He's an author, he's an entrepreneur, educator, and we're going to get into his background and talk to him about how he kind of got here, but we're really pleased to have him here. And he and I have been friends for, I don't know, at least 7 years or so. So excited to have him. All right, so let me grab you a mic. There we go. Is it working?
Hello? Yeah.
All right. So what I thought we would do is we're going to do our chat, maybe like 20, 25 minutes, and then we will have questions from the audience. Feel free to either stand up and I can bring the mic to you, or if you just want to tweet your question, you can do hashtag StartupGrindATX, and I can pull up my phone and check those as well, see if anyone throws anything that way. But either way, we definitely want to do Q&A so that people can get their questions out. I'm sure some will develop while we have our conversation. So anyway, let's keep going. All right. So Ash, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here.
So you are an author, a founder, a blogger, a guest lecturer, mentor, all of these things. So let's learn a little bit about you. Where you come from. How did you wind up pursuing an entrepreneurial path? What was your background? Just kind of a brief overview so people know where you come from.
Okay, so if I just go back to where I grew up and things, or
as far as back as you want to go, but just kind of so people paint a picture of what how you got to the entrepreneurship path.
Sure. So I'll do that very quickly. So my parents are Indian, but I've not really lived in India. I grew up in Africa, in Nigeria. That's where I was born and lived there for many years till I came here for university. But I've always had the entrepreneurial DNA. So people often ask me, are entrepreneurs made or born? And I feel that there is something about this craving for building something new, doing something new that's kind of inbuilt in some more than others. And so I always wanted to start my own company. So from the moment I was even in school here, wanted to do something. I was on different visas. I went to school for engineering. But the moment I couldn't start my own company, but I did the next best thing, which is join a startup. And that's how I kind of, you can say, threw myself into the startup world, which was actually very good in retrospect because I learned a lot by their mistakes on their dime instead of, I made my own mistakes later on, but that was a good way to get started. So that's maybe kind of a quick pass. I would say my parents were always very encouraging, which was great of entrepreneurship. And my dad gave me advice very early on, which is if you want to, because I became very academic, wanted to pursue an MBA, a master's, PhD, just collect all the certificates. And he said if you want to go the academic route and teach and be a professor, do that. Otherwise, take some time off and go and work in industry, which was actually the best advice that he gave me at that time, because when I did, I never went back to school.
Excellent. So what were some of the things you struggled with early on when you started to walk the path of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I was just describing this to someone just before we started, is that looking back, I find my journey went through 3 stages, and I find that a lot of entrepreneurs go through those same 3 stages. I call the first stage the artist phase, which is let's just build cool, amazing stuff and change the world. And so let's create art for art's sake. And so for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's falling in love with an idea, which is just code for their solution. So they have some tech or some solution that they want to build, and they spend every waking hour just trying to bring that to life. And so that's how I started my first company. Pretty soon you realize that maybe a lot of those assumptions about the solution were wrong. You can rationalize only so much. Pretty soon you enter stage 2, which is artists have to eat as well, or they're going to starve. So you have to figure out how to get good at running a business. And so I went through that stage as well, where I realized that my original idea was not going to work, but there were some salvageable assets there. I turned that into a sustainable business and ran that for a few years. And then the third phase I call the purpose phase. So this is when you begin to realize that there is something that's driving you that's bigger than just the technology or the solution. I call that the purpose, and it's often around finding passion for the customer or the problem. That's been my pattern, that's been the pattern that I fell into, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs fall into that. And when you do that, it's a very different thing, because it's not about how do I take my solution to market, but rather how do I serve this customer segment or solve this problem. And whatever solution works, we will entertain that and test it. And that's kind of a phase that I'm in now, and that's been kind of my journey, how I got there.
So somewhere along the way you developed enough of an insight into these issues that you're describing that you wrote a book, Running Lean. But I know that there was a lot that came before that which set you up to be able to write that book. And I was wondering if you could just describe your process for how that book came to be.
Yeah. So, through this process of the artist and the making money phase, I built lots of different products. Not all of them were successful, as I said early on. Sure, like anyone else, I would have liked to see more success than failure. But the thing that I got very intrigued by was that I couldn't tell the difference between a good idea and a bad idea until 2 or 3 years later, and that was just too long. So I did the math and realized that I didn't have a magic time machine, so I'd only have so many ideas in my life, and I need to get better at vetting those ideas. So that's what started my own introspective learning of how do I tell whether a good idea, how do I tell a good idea from a bad idea, kind of very early on. So around that time, I ran into some of the early works that Eric Ries was putting out, Steve Blank were putting out on what became customer development and the lean startup, and a lot of their stories resonated with me, and so I began to ask questions, and there was no one to really ask. This was not really a well-developed methodology back then. Eric didn't know me, Steve didn't know me. So I decided to just test it myself and blog about it. That was kind of a crazy thing that I did, which is just take one of my products and openly blog about every learning that I was getting or going through, and that struck a nerve. And that's kind of how the blog became the minimum viable product or the test bed for what eventually became the book, and I became an accidental author in the process. So just by way of looking for answers in a way.
Very cool. So, how did you know that you were filling an unmet need when you wrote Running Lean?
Yeah, so I didn't jump into it. So again, in the previous life, when someone says, "Oh, your blog posts are good, maybe you should consider writing a book," I may have entertained it because again, that's the love for the solution, or becoming an author if that's what one wants. But I kind of ran away from it. I said, writing this blog in itself is very hard work. Many of these blog posts take me hours, some take me 8 hours to write, and this is all on the side. I was not getting paid to do this. So at first I rejected a lot of the requests to write a book, but you begin to see patterns. When people ask for something repeatedly, and you've probably seen this in whatever company you're in, you begin to want to explore a bit more. And so that's when I decided to interview some of these people that were asking me to write this book and really run through this process of understanding why they wanted the book. And in that process, I began to learn that these people were struggling through very similar things that I were. They were entrepreneurs like myself, and they had looked at everything that I had looked at, and so there was something there that was resonating. But even then, I felt that writing a book was a massive undertaking. So I actually wrote the book in a very non-traditional way, which is I decided to first teach everything that I was going to write about, and I didn't even know what that was going to be. So I just got in a room like this one and took my table of contents, or whatever version it was at the time, created some slides around that, and offered a free workshop and offered some paid workshops, and spent several months just teaching what I was going to write about. And once I got clarity, then I just went and wrote it, and that was the process.
Awesome. So for people that haven't read this book, what were some of the key takeaways from the book, just to quickly summarize?
Yeah, so one of them I kind of touched on already, which is in that earlier artist phase, it's this, what I call the entrepreneurial bias or the innovator's bias, which is the kind of unconditional love for the solution, where we spend every waking hour trying to build this thing that's in our head, either through bootstrapping or hitting the pitching circuit and just trying to get people to see what we see. And unfortunately, it's very hard for people to do that. I'm just talking to people on the other side. And so that was the big lesson learned. The other thing was that building a solution is not enough. If anyone here is familiar with the Lean Canvas, there is a solution box that is part of your business model or part of your idea, but it's only a small part. There are many other moving pieces. And so the big epiphany in that book was what we are all building as entrepreneurs is not just a great solution, that's important, but it's only a smaller part of a bigger business model. And the quicker you can start shifting gears and think in that business model context, the better it is for you. And so often the world has changed. It used to be that building things was hard. You had to go through lots of pitching to raise money because everything was expensive. Office space was expensive. Licenses were expensive. If you're doing anything in software, you had to get people. They were expensive. Now with open source, cloud computing, the internet, the world has changed. We can build almost anything these days. The bigger question is, will anyone care? And so that was kind of the transition that book tries to bring to light, which is, let's test what's risky in the business model first, and then work on the business model before the solution.
So what are some tips or some thoughts to make sure that we're not wasting our time when we're trying to figure out our business? How do we know that we're not just spinning our wheels?
Right. So maybe just with a show of hands, anyone here try the Lean Canvas or business model canvas? Okay, just for everyone else, it's essentially a one-page business plan. So if you look at traditional business plans, they take too long to write, but worse, nobody reads them. So why spend all this time writing a document which oftentimes is only written as a precondition to getting in the door to make a pitch? The idea of these tools, these one-page versions of them, is you can take an idea and, like Lego pieces, begin to see how they might fit together. It's designed to all be visualized on a single page, so it's a lot easier to see your idea, but a transformation happens. Whenever we have done these with entrepreneurs, in their mind, they think they understand their business very well, but when you fill out this canvas, which has only 9 boxes, you begin to realize that you don't quite know everything about your business model. And that's the first feedback you need to get. So realizing that is very critical. From there, the whole process of starting up is really a series of conversations. So it's taking these assumptions that you have on page and seeing how close do they match reality. So the book, gets into how do you get out and talk to customers, how do you share this, how do you share your idea with others, and who you share them with will change what you talk about. But that is the process on how you might share an idea, get feedback, and then decide what to do next.
I hear from many entrepreneurs that they don't want to share their idea because they're afraid that it will be stolen. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so we used to have this, it was kind of a mental exercise, but I don't think anyone ever took us up on this challenge. It wasn't just me, but many in the Lean Startup kind of circle that kind of threw this out. And that was that so ideas getting stolen is a very hard thing to do. Even good ideas are hard to spread, and all of us have great ideas, and we still struggle. So what do you think people will steal your idea with a mediocre one? But that's the whole challenge. What we say is that keep the best idea for yourself. Take your second best idea and run an experiment. Just try to get it stolen. Go and write to every single product manager that could implement this idea, every big company out there, every startup out there, and see if they will steal your idea. And I guarantee that it will end up in the waste paper basket because people will not see what you see. So that's that thought exercise. Again, if anyone wants to do it and share results, that would be great. I even went and registered stealmyidea.com, which I haven't done anything with, but that is something I want to do, is get people to put ideas to see if they'll get stolen and track that. So that's the first answer. But the second part of it is that you have to still be smart about how you share your idea. I'm not advocating the opposite of going and telling everything about your idea to everyone. So the second rule there is, you don't have to go and talk to a competitor or a startup founder. The whole process is about finding customers. So you should only be talking to customers, and customers don't want to build the solution. They want you to build it so they can buy it from you. So if you talk to customers and not to competitors, that's a way of sharing the idea. The third piece here is that even customers don't care about the solution. If some of you may like to enjoy eating sausage, the moment you know how the sausage is made, maybe not so much, right? The same thing is true with customers, is that they want the end result of your idea, not the secret sauce of the algorithms or the big data things that you're doing behind the scenes. They just want that end result. And so when you're talking to customers in the canvas, it's really the value proposition that you are trying to communicate, which is, I know you have these problems. If you use a solution like mine, it does this for you. And if that's interesting to them, they'll have a conversation with you. If it's not interesting, they'll kind of just keep walking. And that's how we want to talk to customers. So you don't have to get even into the intricacies of the idea. You don't have to ever share the secret sauce when you're sharing an idea.
Running Lean has two interviews, the problem interview and the solution interview. And the problem interview, you want to get the customer to talk about their problems openly and just get them to go on and also talk about current solutions to their problem. And then the solution interview is more about, showing them your solution and seeing if they're super excited about it or if they're not excited at all. So splitting those two the pieces up. Another thing that I want to ask you about is competition. A lot of entrepreneurs, they get obsessed about their competition, and they think that they should, I guess, be looking over their shoulder a lot and really maybe doing feature by feature comparisons and things like that. How do you, in the tools that you use, think about competitors, and should I worry about them early in my business?
Sure. So I guess the first thing, if you look in the canvas that I created, there is no box for competitors. There's actually another label that I'll describe here in a second. But the reason I took that out is that when people think of competitors, they look around for people like them. So if you're a startup, you look for other startups. If you're in a category like software or hardware, you might look in that particular space. Semiconductors, you'll kind of look in that space. And that often gives us either a false sense of security because you don't find a lot of people in there, or it does the opposite, which is it freaks you out because there are too many startups and you get scared. And you may even kill your idea or start doing things, changing the idea on the basis of what you think the startup down the street is going to be doing. But the true test of your competition is not who you think they are, but rather who your customers think they are. So in the process of talking to them, when you articulate a clear problem and then explore in that problem interview, how are they solving this problem today? If your competitor's name comes up, then by all intents and purposes, they are your competition. You have to anchor price against them. But if their name doesn't come up, then they aren't your competition. But I almost always say that some competition exists, and so in the canvas you don't find the word competitor because that tends to be too narrowly defined in terms of a category. I use the word existing alternative. So I can't tell you how many startups I have seen that have been killed by an Excel spreadsheet or by email, not by some shiny startup down the street. So the challenge for that startup was, how do I take my collaboration software, a new process, and get people to fire email or fire a spreadsheet and instead pay money for this product? And that becomes your competition. And those are much harder to get people to switch away from because they're free and ubiquitous. So to me, I focus in on those types of things. And so in the beginning, yes, you shouldn't really pay attention at the classic definition of competition. You need to take your first stab at your customer problem, what you think they might be using today to solve the problem. But then you have to get outside the building and through that interview process, extract as much knowledge as you can about how are they indeed solving this problem. And ideally, you want to see them failing. So ideally, they have a goal. They're not able to achieve that goal, and their solutions aren't working. That's where room for innovations, that's where room for something different lives, and that's where ideally your solution should come from.
Awesome. So is there anything else about Running Lean, your first book, that we should touch on before we move on to Scaling Lean?
I think the whole mindset of kind of the business model is the product is kind of the key theme. The other thing the book really talks about is it really talks about a conversation that the entrepreneurs need to have with customers. So we often pay lip service to talking to customers because we think customers can tell us everything, but you have to know how. If you just go and talk to customers, Steve Jobs said it well, which is it's not the customer's job to know what they want. And you've probably heard the faster horses quote, the misattributed Henry Ford quote. But if you talk to customers and ask them with a survey or focus group or whatever, what should I build? You'll get a laundry list of things, but that may not be what they really want. And that's because they don't know themselves. They don't know their problems well enough. And so that's what I would say the book gets into, techniques for how do you really extract what customers want without directly asking them. And I kind of gave a glimpse of that, which is through that problem interview process, you want to see what are they trying to get done, what are they doing to get that thing done, and ideally what pain points or problems or obstacles are they running into, and then you go away and then build something amazing to actually get that job done. That's what Steve Jobs did over and over again, not by even interviewing people. He just took problems and observed them, looked at how people were using phones and said, we can design a better phone. People are carrying around 3 devices, we can collapse that into one, which was the first iPhone.
Speaking of him, I think one of the criticisms of lean has to do with, iterating from some very, starting point and thinking that you can iterate your way to greatness. And then the contrast might be like Steve Jobs, where he designs everything in his mind and it's perfect. Now, most of us aren't Steve Jobs, but how do you think about this idea of designing everything up front versus iterating your way?
Yeah. So one of the mantras that I talked about that got me going was the life's too short to build something nobody wants kind of thing. Having built many products, what drives me today is what's on my shirt, which is love the problem, not your solution. And the way that I kind of bring that into context is that even if we take the lean startup approach, unfortunately, too many people look at it just from an experimental mindset, just from an iterative mindset, which is let me rush to build a minimum viable product out there, which is my best definition of a solution. Let me put it on the wall and then see how people react to that and learn and kind of iterate from there, which is better than the alternative, which is let me spend 6 months building this amazing product and then realizing that nobody wants. So I think there's a lot of value in that process, but I find that too many people can also hit a local maximum, which is you can't iterate yourself to greatness. If you put a crappy solution out there, you can make it less crappy, but it may not become still an amazing solution. For that, you really have to get into the problems. So on the other extreme, we sometimes find the design thinking camp, which is let's go and really understand problems well enough. But I feel that they too sometimes go to the other extreme, which is they may find some very interesting solutions to problems, but they may not be monetizable, they may not be big enough problems worth solving. And I think the truth or the best success lies somewhere in the middle, which is you have to go through these ideation phases where you are immersing yourself in your customer's world, really deeply understanding problems. And that's where you generate your hypotheses or guesses, if you want to use a less fancy term. And then we turn them into experiments, and the lean startup is great at that, where we can validate whether those things we learned were actually actionable. And I find that that's the right balance between the two. So going the extreme of just iterating with experiments can lead you down a path of suboptimal results, and then doing the opposite, which is just collecting all kinds of ethnographic reports and research, can fill up books, but maybe not give you any customers either.
Gotcha. Okay, so moving on to scaling lean. So I guess the first question would be, why write another book? You already wrote this awesome book. There's lots of books out there about scaling your business. So what were your, driving forces behind wanting to write another book?
Yeah, so it was just that people kept asking me more questions. That's just the short answer. Is that so the first book I wrote, as I mentioned, was written for the entrepreneur, getting outside the building, talking to a customer. The questions I began to hear is that I've done that. I went outside, I did my lean canvas, I went and ran some experiments, I went and validated that this is a problem that's interesting to go solve. But when I got it back inside the building and showed this to my stakeholder, my investor or my CEO, they looked at me and still didn't get how big this idea could become. And that was a challenge that people are running into, which is how do I communicate the big picture of the idea? And so I realized that with running lean, with a tool like the lean canvas, you could replace only part of the business plan. You could take all the chapters and the words in the business plan and turn it into this one-page story of the business model, but it still didn't communicate the financial forecasts and the metrics behind your business, and that was a piece that a lot of people were tripping up on. So scaling lean is kind of a sequel in a way to running lean, and the conversation is different. So it's really the entrepreneur to their stakeholder trying to communicate an idea for which they may have small-scale validation, and it gives them the language to do it. So we all talk about traction. Traction is a hockey stick curve going up and to the right. But if I ask you what traction means in your business and how do you measure it, you might say it's revenue or profit, but that is a trailing indicator. To me, what's more interesting is show me how you can predict revenue and profit going up in the future, not after the fact, because that's not very helpful. So the book gets into that type of language and those types of metrics, and that in many ways is what that book was all about.
Gotcha. So could you walk us through an example of one of the, like the story of an entrepreneur that was struggling with something that this book was intended to help?
The scaling lead?
Yeah, like I'm sure there's some stories in there that you could share that like express. I'm sure some of the people in this room might even be kind of stuck in some of these spots. And how does the book kind of help them get out of that?
Yeah, so it's another trap we sometimes fall into with even just taking a lean startup approach. And I fell in this trap even myself. I can tell a very personal story, which is we can go out and run these experiments. And for this one product, I went out and did the problem interviews, did the solution interviews. I even found paying customers, which is all very good. But 6 months down the road, I found that even in the best case scenario, this idea was too small to pursue. It was an idea worth pursuing. It was just not, it didn't match the goals that I had for myself. And so the book allows you to kind of test that really up front. So really even in the ideation phase, you take your ideas, you take some very core, so if anyone here done a financial forecast with this Excel spreadsheet, so that's an exercise in number crunching, right? So you take a end result and you're plugging away with hundreds of numbers to create something that is somewhat believable. Well, if you look at all those numbers, they're all driven by a handful of key metrics. So I'll argue that there are only 3 or 5 key metrics on which everything else is derived, and some of the things are even non-relevant, like your spend 5 years from now. We can't predict what that's going to be. Your cost structure 5 years from now. It's going to be a function of what business you're in, which is hard to see. So what this back of the envelope calculation lets you do is take some very simple assumptions that are all on the canvas and do a very quick calculation that usually takes less than 5 minutes. And oftentimes when we have done these with entrepreneurs, they can tell in those 5 minutes whether this idea in a best case scenario will work. And oftentimes it doesn't, because too many entrepreneurs, as I said, are like artists, which means they don't price their products well. They usually undercharge or choose not to even charge anything or not even think about pricing in the beginning, which I found to be a big mistake. So time and time again, I've tried to steer people into just figuring out I guess the first thing is thinking about pricing from day one, and then 2, coming up with the right ballpark pricing for your product. I'll have someone say, well, I can't price my product because I haven't built my solution yet, and I would tell them that it's not really about, so you don't price against your solution, you price against the problem. If the problem is worth solving, you can anchor it against what people are spending today, not what it costs you to build. That is cost-based pricing, which doesn't really work all that well. You want to do value-based pricing. So those are some of the things you can do very early on to kind of test the idea.
You said that just because I know my revenue number is going up, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm in good shape. There's other factors. What do you think people should pay attention to? What metrics should they pay attention to know that they're on the right track with their business? Like, what are these 3 to 5 metrics?
Yeah, so in the book I use this metaphor, and initially that was going to be the title of the book, and my editor talked me out of it because I can see it being a horrible title. So I have this metaphor of the customer factory, because the idea there is that we're all in the business at the end of the day of making customers. Now it sounds horrible because it seems like a very mechanical, cold process, but it's quite the opposite. So the way that I draw that analogy is that you're essentially building a value proposition. You're using your marketing. You're building a product to bring unaware visitors in on the left-hand side, and once they experience you and your company and your product, they should become a happy, passionate, retained, paying customer. And so that's what the customer factory metaphor is all about. And there are really 5 steps in there which kind of build on Dave McClure's Pirate metrics, which some of you have probably seen. I kind of treat them differently. So usually the Pirate metrics is often drawn as a funnel. This kind of draws it more as this factory metaphor. It's a more a visual picture, so you actually have to see it. We've got the book in the back. You can kind of browse through it at the end. But the 5 steps, the first step is really acquisition. So the first thing that any business has to do is turn somebody who is a stranger into somebody who might be interested in what you have. The way you do that is by nailing a problem. It's not even by the solution. So we get bombarded with solutions all the time, but if I can tell someone in this room that might be looking for a job, we have the technology to help you find your dream job, not just any job, but your dream job in 60 days or less. And if you want to learn more, talk to me afterwards. That's an example of nailing a problem with the value proposition. Notice I didn't say how I'm going to do it. I just got somebody's interest if someone here is looking for a job. So that's step number one, is how do we turn that person over to want to talk to us. Step number two is activation, which is what is that first experience? So in this conversation, what do I say next to them? And how do I convince them that I might have something that could deliver value to them? Then we measure retention, which are ongoing uses or interactions with my service or my product. And you want to create value for your customers. A lot of these first phases are all about demonstrating that you can create value, and then some of the value capture pieces come in. Now, if you can create enough value for people, you have to monetize, because there is no business in your business model without revenue. So that's where revenue piece comes in. So if you can retain people for a while, and this is again a pattern you might see with any product you use, you first get acquired, you use the product for a little while, you have the first experience, you like it, don't like it, you go back to it, and then you decide to buy something, or you decide to keep buying something if it's a subscription, and that would be how we track revenue. If you like something well enough, you start to refer it to other people, and that's the fifth metric, which is the referral metric. The nice thing with referral is that it works both ways. When you create value for people, they get happy and they refer you. If you make them unhappy enough, they'll also refer you. They'll just refer you negatively, and you don't want that kind of referral. So you have to distinguish between the two, and so it really is. So that in many ways is the blueprint for how we might create a customer from an unaware visitor. And if you measure just those 5 metrics, you can get a pretty good sense of how your business is doing. And then again, the book goes into a lot of techniques for ways to measure and how to measure and tools for measuring.
Cool. So related to scaling, so there's this Paul Graham quote that's often thrown out there that says, do things that don't scale. And I was wondering if you think this is good advice and what he means by that.
Yeah, it's a pattern that I fell into rather accidentally, and that was when I became that accidental author, which is writing a book is a massive undertaking. And I, as I said, wrote the book not by locking myself in a room and just cranking out a bunch of pages, which is how most people write books, but really going out for 6 months and running workshops with dozens of people. And somebody once asked me, and this was like 3 months into the process, so how many pages have I written? And I told them 0. And they thought I was just slacking and not doing any work. But the thing is that I wrote the book in a very non-traditional way, is that by teaching, my slides became the material for the book. And when I actually got down to write, I pretty much had most of the work done. It was now taking those ideas and turning them to pages. And so I caught up. The time it took me to write that book was exactly the same, which is about a year for most authors from when they go into the mountains and take a sabbatical. But I did this in front of my audience. Their feedback helped me write, I think, a better book, and I got paid to do it. So I got an advance from a publisher later on, but I got paid to run these workshops, and that was a way for me to also write the books. So that's an example of how you might do, and I accidentally stumbled into this thing, which is you want to go slower in the beginning to really figure out what will allow you to go faster later on. To where now I make that a very deliberate part of the process, which I think what Paul Graham is also trying to bring out, is that too many entrepreneurs worry about the 1,000th customer when we should really be worrying about customer number 1. That is your singularity moment. When you can create something out of nothing, that's when you should pop the champagne and celebrate, because you've got somebody who actually gave you money. Now, of course, 1 is a lonely number, so once you have 1, you can't just go celebrate for too long. You have to get back and try to see how do I take that one customer and turn them to 10 customers, but still not 1,000. And even going from 1 to 10, doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot of work. And you are doing things in this non-scalable manner. You're learning a ton. If you can repeatedly get 10 customers, the next challenge is how do I go to 100? Then how do I go to 1,000? And so that's a 10x kind of a ramp. Which, if you look at any hockey stick curve, even Facebook's or Airbnb's, or pick your favorite hypergrowth startup, you can see a 10x process in the work. It's just they weren't trying to do that deliberately. That's just how things turned out. What I'm saying is that give yourself permission to scale. Don't worry about scaling and then stumble your way into having to embrace constraints and go slow. Rather, give yourself permission to start with one customer, then go to 10, and go to 100. Apply that 10x mindset, and it gives you a lot of power to prioritize the right things at the right time.
So you've kind of used your own processes to deliver these books. You keep putting yourself out there with these workshops. And one thing you told me is that if someone signs up for your product today at LeanStack, that they actually get an email from you, and it says something like, I'd be happy to talk to you. Is it on the phone? Or email? Or you just basically invite them to talk to you. Why do you do that? You're a busy guy.
Right, so it's one of those things. It's actually an internal, this is the only key performance indicator that we all in the team kind of share, and that is the number of customer conversations we have. So everyone on the team, I don't care if you're writing code or you're in marketing or you write books or do anything, you have to immerse yourself in that customer world. Because oftentimes innovation lies in places where we don't know what we don't know yet. And so it's that putting yourself out and just having a conversation with someone, you get to learn a ton without even looking for what you want. So again, I stumbled into that again just by the way of workshops. All the products we have built have followed that pattern. Even the Lean Canvas, by the way, was a simple blog post, which eventually I took into workshops before we turned into an online platform. So every process, every tool, every product we have built has followed that same process. But going back to what we do today is that we try to build a relationship. So it's what most people do with their customers is they say, use my product and then give me feedback. Tell me if my product is good. And it's all about you, and no one cares about you. You have to really frame it about them. So what's in it for them? I learned that with my book. So when I was writing the book and we had some pre-orders, rather than saying, give me feedback about the book, I said, I'm happy to have open office hours, and anyone that has a question on how to apply the book, how to create a canvas, or apply any of these interviewing techniques, get on this call and I'll spend 30 minutes with you and we'll try to figure it out together. So that was a framing trick, which was essentially solving a problem for my customer, but in exchange getting a ton of feedback on what was and what wasn't working. And that's what we have done to this day. So even today, we start to build a relationship. The first email isn't, hey, let's get on a call, because people don't quite know if they want to talk to me yet. So the very first welcome email is really, just welcoming them. And I ask them a very open-ended question to show that we care. So I ask something like, what was the reason you signed up, or what's keeping you up at night? If you've got 30 seconds, it's in the PS kind of buried at the bottom. And funny enough, tons of people reach there, and many of them reply, because it's very refreshing. Many of them say this is the best welcome email they've seen in a while, because it's somebody actually not saying my product is awesome, go use it. They're actually caring about why people might have signed up and what they may be trying to do. So it kind of opens the door for a future conversation. But in that customer factory blueprint that I talked about, we build all kinds of touch points. So when people upgrade, they get an email from me where I thank them for being a customer. And in the interest of improving the product, I do welcome them to a call. So we'll have a Skype call. I have automated this process, so it doesn't take any time to do. It's all automated through the product. The moment you upgrade, a day later you get this email. Email doesn't even go back to me. It goes to my virtual assistant, who will schedule it on the calendar. And so I just every week have people that I get to talk to. And it's great because we get on, there's no agenda. They tell me a ton about themselves, and I learn about what they're trying to do. And that has been where a lot of new ideas have come, new ideas for features have come from. I'll talk about another point, which is when people cancel. So why people hire us, we want to know. Why people fire us, we also want to know. Because sometimes it's because they are done with the product and happy and satisfied. Oftentimes they aren't. We want to understand why that is. And that, again, is a great place where we learn a ton. So it's the ROI for those conversations cannot be measured. To me, it's something that we all have just trained ourselves to do, and we build it into our calendars.
It reminds me of, sometimes you'll go to someone's website and the whole website is structured around that person's product, that person's company. And the best websites are written in the language of the customer. You know, what terms would someone be searching for if they have the same problem? You twist it so that it's about them instead of about you, and you get a lot better information.
Yeah, and it's also changing a lot. So I'll just say that this might be helpful to some, is that when you first start, I talk about narrowing down. So we talked about early adopters a little bit. But the idea of the early adopter is that this is your best ideal customer, and you want to really narrow down. But as you start to grow your customer base, you start to get more and more kind of unusual people start to use your product. So my eye-opening moment was a email I got from a fisherman in Chile, in South America, trying to use the Lean Canvas. And I had no idea how this person may have gotten even onto our website, because at that point, we're only building this for Lean startup practitioners. Many of them were in high tech. And so I had to get him on a call. And so I got him on a call and had to figure out how he heard about us, which is, by the way, one of the questions I always like to hear. And it's a very disarming, simple question, which is, how did you find us? And he actually was in a networking event, maybe like this one, trying to write a business plan, and over drinks, complaining about having to do it. And someone said, don't write a business plan, go to leancanvas.com. And that's how we ended up there. But that was very eye-opening, because he was completely lost. All our language, all our terms, everything there was about this lean startup, machine who understood everything. And so that's when it forced us to start thinking about who our customers really were. And that has changed over the years. It used to be this very clear persona of this high-tech entrepreneur, and now it's people like him, people wanting to start businesses, people even age doesn't matter. We have people who are students at UT and other schools applying this, even in high schools. We have 60-year-olds doing Lean Canvases. They're kind of retired but want to do something, and they are starting businesses as well. So it's really a big spectrum.
Awesome. Well, I think that's pretty much it for the conversation part, but I do want to open it up to your questions. So if anyone has questions for Ash, let's go ahead and get them out there. I can bring the microphone to you if you just want to raise your hand. Anyone has questions? All right, let me bring it out there.
So the business I work in is in ad tech. And so essentially, the customer isn't just one group of people. There is the visitor, the person that might click on the ad. There are the publishers that we want to show our ads. And then there are the different advertisers that are going to work through our ad tech platform that we also have to convince that, our platform is wonderful and they should use it. And that's always kind of thrown me a little bit for a loop in doing a Lean Canvas, because there's such different groups of people that we all need to kind of satisfy and build something for, but it doesn't quite fit kind of in one sheet at that point.
Sure.
I was curious kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so if you've got these multi-actors, it's almost always better to create a canvas for each one. In our online tool, we kind of use a hashtag feature where you can hide things, but the idea is that you can keep everything in one canvas, but you're kind of selectively filtering out the perspective. But it's very helpful to have a canvas for each, because as you said, the value prop for the advertiser is how do I get more ROI for my money? The value prop for the person who's clicking the ad is how do I get the best deal or the best product? How do I find that, or is this something worth clicking? And then for you, it's how do I kind of match those two together? And of course, you have a third piece as well. But for each of them, I would create a canvas, and so each one of those canvases should at least fit on a page. But in this case, yes, you will have three. So again, when you've got these more multi-sided or marketplace types of models, like buyers and sellers, like Airbnb, the same thing applies there as well, which is it's the incentives for someone, like say, renting their space from Airbnb or other person renting and actually hiring that are very different, and the segments can be different. So you do want to create a canvas for each one.
But once you've done that, once you've created that canvas for each one, you sort of have this disjointed strategy where who are you really going to focus on?
Yes. So this is so the question was, once you have these different canvases, they may not align, and that can be. So that's an interesting feedback right there. So if I look at, let's just take Facebook for example. Facebook actually has to play kind of mediator in the middle, and like you do probably, which is they would love to take all of our data, everything we can give them, and sell it to the advertisers so they can show us all kinds of ads. But we users don't want to do that. They always run into problem with crossing a line of privacy. So they have to play that game, and so they have actually misalignments between what the advertiser may want to make their platform actionable to what we as end users would want to give up. So they have to play that fine line. And that's something to recognize and understand. How do you really build a solution that can straddle both? Other times you do have alignment. If I look at enterprise software, your decision makers want to buy this expensive enterprise software because it helps the company make money or save money. And the employees want to use it because it increases their productivity or makes a process easier or better, whatever that is. In those cases, there should be alignment. So the employee should be saying, we love this product, and the decision maker should say the ROI is there, so let's keep using it. So in those cases, it's nice, but even the language is different. Like you might take an enterprise software to the IT department, and they are concerned about security, right? Your employees don't care about security. That's not their reason. That's not their concern. But you have to, again, have a canvas for the IT department because their problems or their concerns, objections are going to be different. So I do feel that finding that right strategy is really putting those three canvases, whether it's on a page or 3 pages on a whiteboard, and then building a strategy that weaves through how you might overcome those differences. Some of it is picking the right early adopters. So if you pick the right, so if you build products that advertisers want to sell, but the people who you're selling, that's a very obvious one, the people that you are advertising to don't want those products, of course that selection of product is critical, and we were talking a bit of, you have a very clear segment, so I would think that the advertisers you target is also very clear. So you want to find alignments in those ways, so you don't have inventory for something that nobody wants to buy or that you don't have access to. So those are some obvious ones, but there may be others that you kind of have to weave in.
Okay, anybody else have a question for Ash? All right, over here. Coming. No, it's all good.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so I heard you mention you have a new site, like, is it Steal My Idea, or is that what you were saying? Okay.
It's not launched. It's a domain that I have that I was going to put up, and I haven't done anything with it. But that was the idea was to create a site where we challenge people to get their ideas stolen.
Well, I like that. I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that. If there were, like a public forum that you could go to where these ideas, not necessarily like investigated problems, but just something that you, based on your experience, which is probably way different than majority of people, might identify a need, would you put it out to the public to see if someone else, students or just people of other avenues would be open to working with you to solve and find solutions too?
Yeah, I think that there can actually be something positive that comes out of it, which is, so on the one hand, I don't think that people will steal an idea in that form, but I feel that it might inspire them to go and explore a problem better. And Y Combinator, the very popular accelerator, does that a lot. Like Paul Graham will actually do a blog post where he'll say, if people can solve these are problems worth solving, and they're hard problems. But if people can solve these types of problems, even like coordination, setting up, I talk about how I use a virtual assistant. That's because I've tried and failed many times with an online, fully automated solution out there. But if someone can build an AI solution to schedule a meeting and deal with all the exceptions and add 2 or 3 people and coordinate that's a hard problem to solve, and it's a problem worth solving. So things like that, even just putting that out there, I think inspires people to say, this is something I can focus my attention on instead of what should I work on. So I do think there's some value in that site over time.
That's the answer. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, anybody else have one? Okay. You go.
Thanks. So if you have a B2B business, often you have a lot of stakeholders and decision makers, but in many of those cases, you don't actually get to talk to some of them because, in the bigger companies, you're insulated from them and you have your people that you get to talk to. How do you go about finding out and really teasing out the problems of the higher up decision makers and finding out what that is? Do you have any techniques?
So I guess I would say that there are some techniques, but I would say that the first feedback that you get is, I would say the first product that someone solves in a B2B environment is really the sales process, and it's just what you described, which is what are the right touch points, what are the fewest touch points I need to make a sale, and then there are many tactics and strategies for that. Like you might go to events, you might run webinars, you might have a Rolodex where you can go in at the top, you might have to go in from the bottom, you might do a Dropbox model, which is put a product in there, so, let users, employees start using it, and once they have enough users using it, then you go and approach people and say, so there are many tactics for doing those types of things, but I would say that becomes, so when I work with the team, and I've worked with many startup teams that were students out of college trying to build an enterprise product, and we set, so my goal is not to lecture people or tell them, this will never work or this will work. I feel like that's a disservice. What we want to instead do is really identify risky assumptions in the business model. So we might say, let's go and have a conversation with anyone in the company. I don't care who it is. It could be a manager, it could be an employee. Let's go and explore this problem from any of those segments, right? It could be the person using the product, the person buying the product. And oftentimes we find that it's not as easy as it sounds, right? And that's usually that first feedback, which is maybe I don't have the right channel into this customer segment, and that's what I need to fix first. Sometimes that fix is by getting an advisor on your team. So maybe you can't open the doors, but if you really ask around in events like this one, you may find somebody who is from that industry and likes what you're doing and becomes an advisor to you and helps open some of those early doors. So for me, I look at that as being things to focus on instead of just looking for the raw tactics, if that makes sense. And we can kind of one-on-one look at specific issues you're running into, and there may be some tactical things to try. But I would say that a lot of trying to get the right person to talk to you is by creating an offer that is compelling to them. So it's a lot like catching fish. If you go to the river and try to catch salmon, you're not going to catch any salmon because they don't hang around by the riverbed. They're kind of somewhere in deeper waters. And so you have to know who you want to attract and what kind of bait to use and where they might hang out. And then you go and place those types of offers there and have that conversation. Before you can pitch, you have to get their interest. And so when you're dealing with the decision makers, oftentimes, at least from our experience, we have had those challenges as well. Our tactic has been, let's get people using our tools, and that percolates up. And then eventually a decision maker will reach out to us because they want to learn more about it because they've heard so many things inside the company already about it. So that has been our approach, is more bottoms up than top down. But again, there are many tactics, but I don't want to dive into tactics because that may not be as applicable in every case.
Okay, anyone else have questions? Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to get your thoughts on customer surveys for market validation for a product. So we sent out a survey, let's say we have a 40% answer rate, and then we take the 51% of people who said, I want product A over product B. And all of a sudden, we're making a decision based off essentially what 20% of our customers might want, right? Do you have any advice for that particular scenario?
Yeah, so I'm even in the Running Lean book, I'm not a big fan of jumping to surveys right at the very beginning. Oftentimes because surveys require you to have two things down. One is you have to know the right questions to ask, and oftentimes, as I said, we don't know what we don't know, so you have to really use more open-ended exploration. If every survey question was an open-ended essay question, no one's going to fill it out, so you have to have these multiple choices. So not only do you have to know the right questions, but you also need to have a short list of right answers or possible answers. And so while it can be good for obvious things like, how many of our customers might be on a mobile device, those are things you can survey. When you're trying to really uncover when people might use your products and what are they trying to do, I find it's better to have a conversation. So I do a two-phase approach. So I will go out and commit to maybe talking to 10, 20 people, my own customers, and really say, we are trying to build X. We think it's going to help you do Y. is that something of interest? And if it is, tell me how you're doing why today, and then we'll just have this conversation. It could be 15, 20 minutes. After you do about 10 or 20 of those, you get a ton of information, and then I will build a survey and I might send it to more people, and then what we get back I find a lot more actionable. So that's how we tend to use surveys for the most part. At the same time, I think your question was more around statistical significance maybe, is that all of these techniques, even in the lean approach, you can drive them to getting statistical significance, but that requires you to have a lot of data points, which can sometimes take a long time. A lot of entrepreneurship is really more about finding signals in the noise, acting on them, and if you can see the numbers moving in that right direction, then it validates at least that maybe your hunch or your direction was right. And so you double down on that strategy. And if you don't, then you try to figure out why and maybe pivot from there. So again, I wouldn't look at any one experiment ever as completely being definitively validation or invalidation. They all just steer you in that direction of, are we in that right direction or not? And sometimes you get false positives, so you have to realize that we thought this was the right direction, but it may still not be scalable at some point.
And if I could just ask one more follow-up question. So is that something where when you are scheduling these customer interviews or customer feedback sessions, you would just send out an email and say, hey, here's my calendar, 2 hours a day, sign up for a 30-minute slot and let's chat? Or
no, so I would say that I guess where I was going early on with the welcome email was that relationship building, which maybe I didn't highlight enough, is that before you can ask for something, you have to really provide value. It's just like any relationship. If you are always the one asking and not giving, then you become kind of a leecher and no one wants to talk to you. And so similarly, if you are just if the first conversation from you with the customer is, get on a call with me and tell me something, people will not engage with you. And so we actually spent quite a bit of time in the early days when motivation is high, because these are people who just signed. If you think of it from a psychology perspective, they just signed up. They obviously were looking for some solution. If you just start asking them, how can I help you? What can I do? How can I point you in that right direction? And actually help them, they are more inclined to one day when you say, hey, we're actually building this new feature, we'd love to get your feedback, to actually jump on a call with you. And that's kind of what we tend to do. And then over time, you can segment your users, and there's a lot of data you can get into, and a lot of tools out there. But we only talk to people that might be using. If you want to improve a feature, we don't talk to anyone. We only talk to people who are using that feature, because it doesn't make any sense to talk to people who don't have any experience. For people who if you want to know what's wrong with the feature, we don't talk to people who are using it a lot. We talk to people who stopped using it. So again, there's all kinds of things you can do and segment your audience, and I can go on in great length at each of those life cycle events, but you can always figure out who to talk to based on what you're trying to learn. And that is very critical to getting the right signals from the noise.
All right, folks, anyone else have any more questions? All right, awesome. We'll just keep this going.
Good.
All right, you go.
Two things. One is I'd see if you would be available to come talk to some of our I-Core folks, because we run the National Science Foundation I-Core program. Sometimes we have 30 or 40, 50 people in our regional cohort, so I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, sure. We
if
should
you
talk
come
afterwards.
The other thing is I'd be curious about how do you position yourself against both Eric Ries's work and Steve Blank's work and even the 3-day startup folks and everything else. I mean, what do you think your unique value proposition really is, and what you're offering to the audience that embraces the business model canvas design?
Yeah, so I talked about early on how there are competitors, and then there are alternatives, and then even within that there are complementary alternatives. So when people come and ask me, should I buy your book or Eric's book? To me, the answer is obvious: you need to buy both, because there are different perspectives. If I'm trying to learn programming, I don't just read one book. I'll read everything I can on the subject till I feel like I've learned, and then I start applying. So I feel that we don't really compete as much as we complement. Where I would say, like, Eric is particularly, he's more about kind of the big idea, and his book was really a why lean startup book, which is hear a bunch of case studies, a bunch of people using it across many different domains. He helped to turn it into this big thing that spread across the world and did a great service in creating a language, I would say, for us to talk about things like metrics and pivoting and business modeling kind of in a more universal fashion. So I think that's his big contribution. Where I tend to come from is my thing is more practice trumping theory, so it's more about how-to stuff. If you read both my books, they tend to be less about anecdotal case studies and more about very practical techniques that I have tested, and so I feel like that is my main differentiation, which is I tend to be more prescriptive in the sense of, when I hear people saying the answer depends on your particular case, but don't ever give you something actionable to go test, I find that to be a cop-out. So I tend to say, here's 3 things you can go test, and based on that, you will know what to do next. And I think that Socratic method is really where I tend to come from. So again, I don't think we necessarily compete on ideology. We just may have different contributions to the same goal of creating a better outcome for the entrepreneur.
And I would say, having read your book and the others, is that I would say that what I love about your work is the tactical tools nature of it, right? It really gives us something to bite into and uses examples versus trying to figure out on our own. I really appreciate that. I'd also be kind of curious around, have you used it? Because where we use it a lot of is actually with international companies that we work with as young startups who may have already gotten some traction, but what we put them through is a rework of their business model using the canvas and the tools, and the discoveries are many times that there's these massive gaps in places, and it really actually helps them. Can you comment about that, the use of your tools for existing businesses?
Yeah, we've done that quite a bit. So it's actually sometimes easier to apply with a startup because there's typically a clean slate. The idea is not yet, there's no legacy, let's put it that way. So it's you can go in many different directions, but you have to know how to kind of steer that in. But with more established companies, sometimes the challenge is even identifying the customer. So I tried to fill a canvas once with a mid-sized company, and we spent 45 minutes just on the customer box because they had launched 3 products through to actually similar but still very different segments. And it was no surprise that the first product was their flagship product, super successful, the other 2 weren't. And the conclusion was that they were kind of steering away from their core, and it became a big strategy discussion on why did we do that and should we really come back in. So I feel that there's a lot of value even for mid-sized companies. We do a lot of work, when I say we, my company, with big companies, enterprises as well, and there too in the innovation sphere, being able to characterize ideas as disruptive or sustaining, again, very helpful. And typically, if you think of it from a disruption sense, if you're in a big company, all business models are going to get disrupted at some point. The choice is, do you do it to yourself or does somebody do it to you? So for big companies, it's really more a question of let's spread our resources across a diversified portfolio. And so we have been building portfolio management tools where you can use canvases and companies can begin to see, are they investing in the right technologies or spaces or customers or problems? And are we doing something in all these spaces at least? Or are we thinking about them? So it can be applied at many scales, all the way from that one person in the garage idea to a multinational corporation.
Yes.
Question?
So I'm glad to hear part of what you said. So my takeaway so far from this has been a concern about workflow. So I learned how to the lean canvas from the business model generation book, which treats it as a very academic approach. It's very Michael Porter-ish the way that it's written. And when I've been using this in the past, I've been using the lean canvas usually in conjunction with building a financial model in Excel. And at some point in the lean canvas, and also with the Excel, there's this oh god moment, And so I've heard you say in your talk, and also frequently, that the students can do a draft of the lean canvas in 5 minutes and 20 minutes here, and then just now you talk about spending 45 minutes in a customer. And I find that my experience with the workflows, and that's I don't know if it's me or if it's my workflow in particular, but that is a very gross underestimate of how much time I spend working through the lean canvas. And In a lot of ways, the lean canvas is never even done. I find that I spend tens or even, sometimes many more multiples of that hours working through a lean canvas, and not because the canvas itself is hard, but because it's the oh god moment and realizing that there's a flaw, and there's a flaw in the model. Is the model recoverable? Is it just broken? And so I think I'm excited to hear what you said about the workflow that you talk about in your book, because the workflow itself, I think, is certainly not really spoken to in the business model generation book. And I think, they have case studies about, okay, this is how we would, do the Facebook or the various pieces in that. But the workflow around this tool and the use of this tool in the context of building a financial model, or if you're old school, a Porter model or something like that, I think those workflows are hard to look at and interesting to look at. And I'm excited to read your book in that context.
Right, and a very simple thing, and maybe I'll ask you, so are you doing these iterations of the canvas on your own, or is it, or are you doing it with someone else?
Often I'll use it to see if I understand the problem. So this is partly, can I even articulate the problem correctly to somebody else? So rather than going to a meeting and say, hey, here's my vision and whatever, if I can't articulate the model in pieces, because I think one of the oh god moments often in a lean canvas is I'll realize that one of the boxes is not in the same order of magnitude as the other boxes. I mean, there's something grossly out of scale than the other boxes, and that's when I have to go back. Either an acquisition cost is grossly out of whack, or the depth of customers in a box is inconsistent with the revenue required to do it, or it's just going to get drained out, and something else doesn't, fundamentally breaks as an assumption that I can test before I go off and ask around.
Yeah, and so I actually take the reason I asked that is that as you describe ours, I take a completely opposite approach, which is we time box the initial canvas not to create a perfect model that's going to stand the test of time, because we just automatically assume that the answers are just unknowable. You can never think your way through a perfect model. You have to test for that. So what we do instead, or what I advocate doing, is set a timer, and the initial canvas, when I do these in workshops or with any team, is 20 to 30 minutes max. Do a snapshot of your idea. It's not about perfection. I want to understand how well you understand your idea as it stands today. And then let's have a conversation. And then when we go through the conversation, there's a diagnostic which you have with an advisor, with a coach, not again to answer all the questions in the canvas, but really starting with the riskiest assumptions. And so a very simple example, on the canvas there is a customer box and there is a problem box. To me, those are the only two boxes I focus in on in an initial conversation, because if I find that you don't have evidence that this customer has this problem, that's what I would ask you to go validate first. Because if you have a perfect model on paper, assuming that problem is right, it's a big core assumption, which if that were to be proven wrong, everything else on the canvas falls apart. Your solution will be incorrect, your pricing model will be incorrect, your channels will be incorrect because that customer doesn't care about what you have. So that is the steering process. So it's a very iterative process. If you're familiar with Agile, for those of you that may have done it, it's let's time box that initial idea down. Let's figure out what is the riskiest thing now. What is that single domino that if it were to topple, the whole castle comes crumbling down? Let's get outside and go validate that, whether that's talking to customers, to industry, whatever that ends up being. It could be a channel risk. Like when I deal with B2B, one of the things I know in the back of my mind is, does this team have the ability to talk to this customer segment? Because if not, it doesn't matter. They may have the best product in the world, but if it's in the forest, it's never going to get out of that forest. So to me, it's a very iterative. There's a lot of trashing that happens, but not in trying to get perfection on the model, but rather over the weeks, you're going to do a lot of iterations on the canvas. But it's a bunch of, let me take my best assumptions that I know today, let me figure out what's riskiest, let me get outside the building, go test them, and then based on my learning, come and update, and then you rinse and repeat over and over.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, is there anyone else that has any questions for Ash? We good? Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for coming and for speaking with us and for answering the questions. Really appreciate it. All right, and so we're going to do the book portion now. So anyone who bought the book ticket, we're going to set up over here on the side, and Ash is going to distribute the books, and he'll sign it if you would like, and you'll get a chance to talk to him for a couple minutes. So yeah, we'll set that up, and we'll get that done, and then we'll continue to network here for a little while. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Especially now, last month I just started my first fire after doing marketing. He lives on the business spot. He's always like, yeah, I can see who takes on what, who becomes a customer, and we can retarget, click on the, if we got a product, go to the website, don't buy, we call it really later, like 10% coupon. Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Oh no. That's great. Yeah. So I'm building an ad network platform. So and I'm working with some guys that have an existing ad network. They have publishing features. Trying to get some more traction and get some more. Yeah. So we work out of Industries, which is one of the other clients, and we have ad walls on spec bucks and just incentivized marketing. If you sign up for the Burger King Club card, you get 5 points of upgrading each training. So incentivize them to support. I read a couple of his books. I just kind of got really into being a startup world. And chat with them. I was chatting with them a little bit before this. Really personable. What kind of startup are you doing?
Well, you can also better hear the energy that they're doing. The product versus the product versus the product that fits in that maybe you're doing
Just a reminder, if you did buy a book, come over to the side here so we can meet your book. We're doing that portion now, and then we'll do more networking.
So the person allowing someone to chat then gets some sort of reward for letting someone do that. It's really cool.
And so when it comes to conversations like this, so you have to also find yourself that in the first 3 years of the conversation,
It's kind of a two-sided marketplace, right? You gotta find all the people that are willing to let in shadow. You gotta find the people that are interested in shadow. Watch, nice questions. can't really get that internship, it's a lower risk, lower area. Maybe it's a leader there's 100 shadowers, and then they choose 3 of them to be interns.
But, and I don't know if you would let them do this yet,
I think he'll really enjoy talking to you. Yeah, he is. I already own this one. It's a great introduction. It is going to kind of an entrepreneur, developer type person, so I really just kind of do everything.
do they review this? So that's why. No, but it's
We're small teams, me and one other guy that I hired, and we're just building out ways to get the advertisements that our founders have been building networks. Basically, they get an ad for $1 and they sell it for $1. So they've been doing that for years. And then they said, okay, well, we're spending money on publishing. We're putting some ads on our website and giving them we can make more money if we can build out that partner and have our own assets shown on the website instead of being one of the ads. That's a big thing that building our own editors have really like that. Our customers and we can get this out.
But you start gambling so important visit.
We just want to get we want to be the publisher for like users, we want to retain users, we want to reward the users.
You're pretty great.
That's great. Thank you.
Did it with the 18 areas? Yeah, we'll find that. Oh, no.
Oh no, I didn't work here. It was all conversation. It was just like that's a thing that you teach just this particular way. I just like you use it kind of make it look like you're actually it's just a feed. But I didn't do much conversion. No, that's the last. So that's it. The first 20 minutes were the question first like I got set users sidetrack me to the 24 hours before we go get things ready and like get things to keep saying the same information, right? This is how it goes, right? This is how it goes. Yes. No, it's just a metric. It's just a number. They don't understand that it's a stretch distance change. They don't understand that also when you change this access, you're changing the way I started off on. I was like, I had to change my information which was the volume by multiple that concept. That's exactly right. So showing that's exactly right. So that's why you have the stretching, right? So it can be just as easy as having a free cut that will if the stretching showing down and then rising across. I love those conversations. I think it's a great I got better. Usually like at first I was like, oh, is that this is a great feature. It's really done a deeper math. I don't know if it's exactly like yeah. She was sure. Let me just think about the presentation. Yeah. Well, that was how Sarah. So she was having a hard time picking someone, and she emailed them. Should I pick this one? Yeah. And usually, like, when people are super comfortable, so they're like, I got Deb, and Deb's gonna interview me. I just sit around and ask her, but where are you? And I was like forcing it, and I was like, what if I did? Yeah, she got so excited. I was like, cool, sweet. And I went over to her office and she chatted for like an hour. And it was like, perfect. She's working. I talked for like an hour. I was like, cool. Try to keep that on the same side. Like, she was like, I started asking questions. I'm sorry. What was your question? Like, how did you learn and she did it so like, my dad said like, I go by an hour. Like, you know, but the way she did it, you realize that, like, oh wow, like like made her feel like a human. It was like so luckily like she kind of like turned it off. But like well, what happened was so it got to like first one week of our all her questions were hitting something. And like they all followed up with them, she's like, what do you mean? It got to 35.
Whoever wants you to sign up for it,
it's just kind of awkwardly waiting for the and sure enough, it was happening. Sarah, there are a lot of people that probably ask me that.
Yeah, they kind of decided
Like this whole team was asking. All of the guys shouted at them. But some good questions came out. There were questions. And then if you go back to it, when you put yourself
Lean stack is like a training for Oh, so you weren't going to do it? No, they're just for like legs and stuff. Oh, got it. Has its covered dance team. So, yeah. It was okay. It was like more show people. Yeah. I just realized it was nice. I got a really nice picture with the lighting source. Well, All the,
All the, oh yeah.
I don't know what to call them, the hordes that.
Yeah, that do eat those types of things, yeah, for sure.
Because deep fried cookies, I don't know if you ever did.
Oh, I did. Yeah,
I had one too, I'm like, this is horrible.
yeah, oh yeah. I felt that same thing. Yeah, sure. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
There is some benefit in understanding the space. So when you go to investment, I think you have to find out. You understand why you fail.
Awesome job. Hopefully next month we'll try to. Thanks for coming up. Yeah, nice meeting you too. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming. Good. I hope maybe the sales folks. Yes. We're all hopefully it's selling. It's not something
Build really awesome product and everything's going to market.
that is important. Enterprise.
I've got some money. We're going to think about it. Y'all have a great evening.
So, how do you know that's
Jeff, do you have more specific questions?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wave graph. How do you get the wave?
Yeah, so, I mean, anybody that's still going through their time and so that's sort of the main reach there, the food jobs and entrepreneurs, the idea kind of the business thing. And so when you haven't launched anything, for example, there's always the question of, okay, show me the user. Now once you get enough user, the question is, tipping point, you have to and the travel,
Even, services, potentially build as sort of an
there's always
SDK
been
add-on.
something you're marketing towards.
SDK
But
is
your
software
job
development
is
kit.
not to
So,
build it
like,
all and then
you build apps, and then other people build SDKs that integrate all those apps, so that they can have sort of another feature in their app.
let me do this.
So, figure out, so like the last company I worked at, they made a Snapchat, and we had companies adding just that to their coding so essentially you already have an app, and they can see the target app here, and then add our service so that they don't have to build it, and they can, like, if somebody was already making
Business model.
that was actually bigger. So
Yeah.
and then just integrate it into their service.
To me, it's really more around the pieces you have. I don't care about the organization story.
Do you work around?
I care about the question you have. So you said you have 100 people love the idea. Okay, that's great. Get those 100 people. And then let's look at how we get the next one.
We do
short order. Get to the next, let's figure out
it's great.
the next thing after.
Putting in
So it's more describing
there's some really good resources for intervention
and use their outputs as well as feedback.
Yeah.
Then figure out the resources.
What do you use for hosting?
Not so like typically no. Yes, that's why I was saying that the best thing you can do is actually launch and build your network. So
Viral storage.
it's the same thing like
It's like Roku is.
like if you were to say
So Forge is
I did accidentally,
but it costs like $15 a month. Before you can have unlimited
before you start buying
connections to DigitalOcean or Linode or whatever you want. And it takes care of a lot of your security updates, and you can manage all of your sites through Forge. And one dashboard, you can see all of your sites, all of your domains, it automatically installs WordPress and stuff. And
because if you just go in and
stuff, but it gives you sort of a Roku light experience for your service.
that is why I would say that
Roku is expensive dynamics. Yeah, we definitely should grab it. I want to reach out to you and so we can stay in touch.
let's make it.
Thank you, Ash.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. So that's getting a factory pricing and then start to increase the number of potential customers.
Yes, correct.
That and the new director.
So the group business is that I'm new regional director. Kimberly, who was checking people in front, was the director for the last couple of years, stepping aside. And so I'm just keeping that on. So, yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, very good. I'm a Ruby guy. I don't know if you know anything about me. I'm a Rails guy. But depends on what you want to do. Either one of those. JavaScript's good. You mean for the
Because that's the only answer I
for
have.
now.
I know it's gonna work based on my approach and
routes. People say routes or routes, but I got what you're saying now. So you're saying people are going to Disney and they need to know the optimal route to see all the stuff they want to see and take into account lines and things like this. With real-time line data, I'm assuming? Yeah. Yeah, I've heard of an app that tries to do this, but it's obviously a problem.
I'm not sure, but it is an excellent, so to use a platform like Horizon, I don't know if you have heard from that background at all, but Heroku is essentially Amazon makes you like raw servers, and it's like you put it up and it has like your own thing. Heroku is a platform for service, and they actually do a lot of this. They give you guys all the infrastructure to scale on it.
Yeah.
So if
You already created it.
if all is on your website starts like that, I don't know, like traffic or anything, I can imagine scale. Amazon actually has some that option to do that. There are a lot of things out there. Like
I think it is a real problem, but you have to get people to use it to tell you what their works or helps or if they have like
so cheap that
I don't know how much effort you think there is in building something. Yeah, so normally, you want to know
the actual product.
right, like
Yeah.
to Ash's
So I was
point,
talking about the infrastructure.
and try and technology is expensive to create. Unless if you're a very good developer and you can create things, then maybe the cost to you is not so high, but for maybe startup people, it's very high to create technology, especially that no one's going to use or no one wants. That's the whole point of being a startup, right? To not build shit that no one wants. So, along the lines of Ash's stuff, I would say you need to talk to people who are going to Disney and understand their problems. Yeah, ads. You could use ads to find people going to Disney. I don't know. I mean, it's a hard problem for you to solve when you're not even there and you don't know many people that are going to Disney, so it's like it's a really hard problem for you to solve. But I mean, it can be fun to build. I like it's hard for you to build a saleable solution. You could build something for free and show, I just try it. But that's you putting a labor of love of coding something up and seeing if you can get it to work. Never knowing if you've got a business, you're just doing it. It's a cool exercise. Yeah, you could do it for no reason. It'd be interesting. Yeah.
How many times
Put a major business.
not to be my
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Their platform is good scale. No, but you can do that, but they're still around and they're doing just fine. That's again where, as engineers, you get obsessed with, like you lose sleep over lose my code scale. To me, that's a good problem to have. If you can write software for 100 customers and you have no business writing any software to begin with. If you can address 100 people, to get to 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, those are all problems we have. Bigger things that are unclear or riskier is what will cause people to come and break your server down. That's what you should get yourself in a position to have.
Got so much stuff. Yeah.
When I said bring it down, I meant demand.
Thanks a lot.
Like create something where you get so much traffic that server goes down. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a great problem.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah. 5 people didn't show up. I'm going to go to the books and I think they came in like we listened to all of our so yeah. I don't think they lost. Okay.
Thank you. Very good to see you. I used to come like years back.
Oh, did you?
There was somebody else on here.
Yeah.
Julian and Andy was the first one.
Julian is bio.